Could you tell us your name, please, and spell your name for the court reporter?
My name is Cory Reeves. First is C-O-R-Y, last is R-E-E-V-E-S.
And how are you employed, sir?
I work as a patrol officer for the City of Eau Claire Police Department.
How long have you worked for the City of Eau Claire Police Department as a patrol officer?
Just over 5 years.
And were you working for the City of Eau Claire as a patrol officer in March of 2018?
Yes, I was.
And on March 22nd of 2018, were you assigned to any matters relating to the investigation that we're here for today?
Yes, I was detailed to assist a Dunn County deputy at Mayo Hospital. That deputy was Emmer Shields, and he was requesting some assistance with an investigation.
All right. And did you go to Eau Claire Mayo Hospital on that day?
At one point, yes, I did.
All right. Was one of the things you were asked to do to meet with Jason Mengel?
Yes, it was.
And did you meet with him?
Yes, I did.
Where did you meet with him?
I met with him at a picnic table just outside the police department.
All right. And that's located in the city of Eau Claire?
Yes, it is.
All right. And after you met with Mr. Mengel, were you assigned to do anything else?
Yes, I was asked to try and locate a subject.
I'm sorry?
I was asked to try and locate a male subject.
And was that male subject Alex Woodworth?
Yes, it was.
What did you do to try to locate Alex Woodworth?
First, I tried to locate him at his residence. I believe it was on Cameron Street in Eau Claire.
And did you go to that residence?
Yes, I did.
And when you got there, what happened?
I made contact with one of his roommates.
Do you recall who that was?
I believe his first name was Matt. I do
Okay.
not remember his last name.
All right. And when you met with Matt, did you ask if Alex was there?
I did, yes.
And was Alex there at that point in time?
He was not.
And did you ask Matt to do anything to try and locate Alex Woodworth?
Yes, I did. I asked him if he had a phone number and if he could give Alex a phone call from his phone.
And did he try to do that?
Yes, he did.
And when that happened, did he, from your knowledge or from what you could observe, was he able to reach Alex?
He was not able to reach him, no.
What did you do then?
After that, I tried to locate Alex at Racy's coffee shop in Eau Claire.
Did you go there?
I did, yes.
And were you able to find Alex there?
He was not there, no.
After that, did you go to Eau Claire Mayo Hospital?
Yes, I did.
And when you went to the hospital, did you meet with anyone?
Yes.
And who did you meet with?
I met with Deputy Shields.
And did you also meet with the defendant at the hospital?
Yes, I did.
All right. And where was the defendant when you met with her?
She was in emergency room number 17.
Can you describe what you observed, or strike that, did you go into that emergency room 17?
Yes, I did.
And when you went in there, can you describe what you observed?
I observed a female curled up in the bed. She had the blankets pulled up to her face, around her chin area. She looked like she had been crying. Her face was red. Her eyes were swollen and glossy.
Right. And when you talked to her, did you talk to her about where she had been earlier in that day?
Yes, I did.
And where did she say she started out that day?
I asked her to describe her day from the moment that she woke up. She said that she woke up at her father's residence.
Did she say anything about her father when she said she was at her father's residence?
She did. She mentioned that her father was nice and that she missed him.
Right. And did you ask her where she went, or if she went anywhere after waking up at her father's residence?
Yes, I did. She said that she had taken a shower and gathered a few things and planned to drive to Racy's coffee shop in Eau Claire.
And did she say if she did she say where her father's residence was as far as what city it was in?
I don't remember if she said specifically, but to my knowledge at that point, it was in Stanley, Wisconsin.
Okay. And did she say where she went when she got to Eau Claire from Stanley, where the first place that she said she went was?
I believe the first place that she said she went was Racy's.
And did she say if she met with anybody at Racy's?
Yes, she said she met with a friend named Max.
Did you ask her what Max's last name was?
Yes, she told me that she could not remember.
And did she say why she met with Max or what happened when she met with Max?
She said that she wanted to bring Max a painting.
Right. And did she say if she actually gave that painting to Max?
Yes, she did. She met with him at Racy's and gave it to him.
And did you say if whether or not she went anywhere with Max?
Yes, she said she drove Max to his residence.
And did she say what happened when she got to Max's residence?
I believe she said that they maybe exchanged some paintings.
Okay. And did she say if she went anywhere after Max's residence?
She said that she drove Max back to Racy's coffee shop.
Did she say where she went, did she say if she went anywhere after she was at Racy's the second time?
Yes, she said that she left there and she went to Alex's residence.
And did you say why she wanted to go to Alex's restaurant, or no, Alex's residence?
Yes, she had mentioned that she had like a heating pad that she wanted to give back to him. She also said that she had she had a hat and maybe a cup that she left over at his house.
And did she say if she wanted to talk to Alex about anything?
Yes, I believe she said that she went over there to talk to him about an investigation.
And did she say what investigation that was?
She mentioned the name John Hansen.
And are you familiar if there was an investigation relating to John Hansen that was currently pending in the Eau Claire Police Department?
Yes.
All right. So did she say if she actually arrived at Alex's residence?
Yes.
All right. And did she say what happened when she got to Alex's residence?
Yes, she said she went inside and met with Alex.
Did she say if anybody else was there?
Yes, she mentioned that his roommate Dave was there.
Did the defendant tell you if she actually talked to Alex about any matters while she was there?
Yes, she did.
What matters did she say she talked to Alex about?
She talked to him about the Hansen investigation.
Did she tell you what Alex's response was when she talked about the Hansen investigation?
She said that he was upset and angry.
Did you ask her what she was upset about? In other words, was she upset about what the investigation was about, or was he upset about her?
He used both he and she, so it's unclear, I think, in the question who he's asking about.
All right. I'm going to overrule. You can go ahead and answer if you can.
Okay, I believe he's asking if Alex was angry. Is that
Yep. She said Alex was angry.
correct?
All right. Did you ask her if Alex was angry at her or at John Hansen?
She said it was difficult to tell.
Right. Did she say that Alex said anything else about the situation, though?
I believe she said that he made a comment that he was concerned that John might try and hurt somebody else.
Did she make some comments about who was doing most of the talking during this discussion about the Hansen matter?
Yes, she said that she was doing most of the talking.
And did she say, that's fine. Did she say if anybody else showed up at the residence?
Yes, she said at one point, Jason Mengel showed up.
And did she tell you what happened when Jason Mengel arrived at the residence?
He spoke with both her and Alex.
And did she tell you what they talked about, that being Alex, the defendant, and John Mengel?
I believe she said that they talked about the Hansen investigation.
The Hansen matter?
Yes.
All right. Did she say what happened after Mr. Mengel arrived at the residence?
Shortly after he arrived, a police officer arrived.
Did she say what happened after the police arrived at the residence?
She said the police officer checked on them to make sure that they were okay, and that Jason left.
And did she say if she and Alex stayed there or if they left as well?
She said that they left his residence.
Did she say who was driving and what vehicle they were driving in?
She said they left in her vehicle and that she drove.
She was driving?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ask her where they went?
Yes.
And what did she tell you?
She told me that they went to a park.
Did the defendant provide you with any further description of the park that would allow you to try and identify what park they went to?
Yes, she said she remembered a frog.
Right. Are you familiar with various parks that are located in the city of Eau Claire?
Yes, I am.
Is there a park in the city of Eau Claire that has a recognizable frog, or at least did as of March of 2018?
Yes, in Owen Park, there's a fairly sizable frog statue near the parking lot, near the entrance.
And did you ask her where in the park she was when she arrived there?
Yes, I asked her, but I think she had some difficulty remembering.
Did you ask her specifically, I think, is there a couple different ways that you can be facing when you're at that park?
Yes, I asked her if she remembered if she was facing towards the playground or if she was facing towards the river.
And what did she tell you?
I believe she said she was facing towards the playground.
Did you ask her what happened when they were at the park?
Yes, she said they continued talking.
Did she say what they were talking about?
I believe she said that she couldn't remember, but they talked about her feelings.
Okay. And did she say what Alex's reaction was when they talked about her feelings?
She said that he was, again, upset.
Okay. And did she say if Alex was calling her by any particular names or using any terms to relate to the defendant?
Yes, she said that he kept calling her boy or little boy.
Right. And did you talk to her about any situations where between her and Alex in the past?
Yes, I did.
And what did she say as far as, did she tell you if there had been issues or had been some problems in the past?
Yes, she said that he treated her poorly.
And did you ask her if if Alex did the same types of things that caused her to believe he treated her poorly in the past on that day, that being March 22nd of 2018?
Yes, I did.
What did she say?
I believe she couldn't remember. She kept saying that it was dark and scary.
Did you ask her about the word boy that was cut into her left arm?
Yes, I can't remember if I specifically asked her or if that was a question that Deputy Shields asked her.
While you were present?
While I was present, yes.
Okay. Did you hear her answer, again, whether it was you or Deputy Shields, did you hear the answer that the defendant gave as to who cut the word boy into her arm?
Yes, I did.
And what did she say?
She said it was Alex.
And did you ask the defendant where Alex was now?
Yes, I did.
And what did she say?
She said that she could not remember.
Now, are you familiar with the location of where Owen Park is?
Yes, I am.
All right. And did you, by the way, did you ask the defendant how she got from Owen Park to the Don Sipple residence where she was found on March 22nd?
If you're referring to the Sipple residence, I'm assuming that's in Menominee?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I did ask her.
And what did she say?
She said she could not remember.
At some point in time, did you continue to ask questions, and did she decline to answer further questions?
I did try to ask further questions at some point towards the end of my first contact with her. She started showing signs that she was going to get sick. She picked up a vomit bag that was next to her bed in the ER.
And did she actually vomit into that bag?
I don't believe that she did. I believe she made some like dry heaving type noises.
Okay. Did you ask her about taking photographs?
I don't remember if I specifically asked her if I could take photographs at that point. I can't remember.
Okay. Would a review of your report refresh your recollection on whether or not you asked her to take photographs and if she had a response to that?
Yes.
After you were done with the interview with the defendant, did you talk to any other individuals at Eau Claire Mayo Hospital?
Yes, I did by phone outside of the hospital.
All right. And who did you talk to?
I talked to the defendant's father and mother.
Okay. And that would be Joe Shane Carlin and Rose Gunnelson?
Yes.
All right. Now, you testified that you're familiar with the location where Owen Park is. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
All right.
You can just publish it.
Your Honor, I'm going to put up here a second. It's exhibit, marked exhibit 419A. I'm not going to be moving it, but I'm going to ask a few questions relating to it, and counsel's indicated he has no objection by doing so. 419A. All right, can you see this okay, Officer Reeves? If not, if you need to move over maybe to the side, just take the mic with you and move to the side a little bit.
I can't see it.
Oh, sorry. Get it where everybody can see it. Can you see it okay now?
Have you ever thought about
Is that better?
like over there, where the whole room can see?
There you go. Chance you can put it behind the witness and then we can all see it.
Sure,
I'll see
that's
it.
fine. Can do that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
You want the jury to see it.
Yeah.
They can't see.
All right, now the witness can have trouble seeing it. Maybe if you can step down, why don't you step around to the other side and bring the mic with you?
I don't think you can take
Can you see? Okay. Let's turn it a little bit. Everybody can see it. Can you guys still see it okay?
I can, I don't know if the jurors can.
Well, I don't know how they're gonna do this. How's that? Everybody?
No, they can't.
Can you all see it? Can everybody in the jury see it? No. Can you all see it?
It's on my neck stand.
Okay, great. So on Exhibit 419A, can you show us where Owen Park is?
It would be right here.
And for the record, Your Honor, he's pointing to a location that's actually marked on there as Owen Park, and it is towards the bottom center of Exhibit 419A. Now, are you familiar with a system known as Milestone in the city of Eau Claire?
Yes, I am.
Can you just briefly explain to us what Milestone is?
Milestone is the name of the public space cameras that are set up around Eau Claire.
And are some of those cameras located at intersections in the city of Eau Claire?
Yes, they are.
And were you familiar with the vehicle that the defendant was driving as of March 22nd of 2018?
Yes, as it was described to me, it was a silver later model Impala with some distinctive markings.
Right? And were you aware approximately what time the contact was with the defendant and Alex Woodworth at his residence?
I believe that the time frame was somewhere between 1 p.m. and 4:15 p.m.
Okay, so the contact at Alex's was around 1.
Correct.
Okay, and were you aware approximately when the defendant showed up at the residence in the Menominee area?
I believe it was sometime around 4
Okay.
p.m.
And with that information, first off, are you aware if there are any of those Milestone cameras which would show the entrance to Owen Park where that frog is?
Yes,
And which camera is that?
it would be a camera at Lake Street and First Avenue.
And did you then have a chance to review the video from that camera for the afternoon of March 22nd of 2018?
Yes,
Did you see that distinctive markinged Chevrolet Impala of the defendants enter Owen Park?
I did not.
If it had entered Owen Park from whatever direction it may have entered, would you have been able to see it on that camera?
Yes, I would have.
Anything else? I have no further questions for Officer Reeves, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. Officer Reeves, is it Reeves or Reeves?
Reeves,
Mr. Reeves, you've been an officer, you said, for 5 years?
that's correct, yes.
So in March of 2018, you'd been an officer for about 3.5 years.
Yes.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your training post-high school? I imagine you graduated from high school, right?
Yes.
And what did you do after that?
I went to college at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville
And how long did you go there?
for 4 years.
Did you get a degree?
I did, yes.
And what was your degree in?
It was in criminal justice.
And after you got your degree in criminal justice, what did you do?
After I got my degree, I worked for the City of Eau Claire Police Department.
And that was 5 years ago now.
Yes.
So your entire career as a law enforcement officer has been with the City of Eau Claire,
Yes, it is.
and it was immediately after college.
I believe there was maybe a 6-month period between college and when I got hired, yes.
Sure. And so when you, so you're about 30?
Objection relevance.
I think it is relevant, Judge. right?
Well, what is the relevance?
How
I mean, this question's fine. How much further we're gonna go into this?
Maybe 2 more questions, but basically, I'll tie it up pretty quick.
Well, I think it's irrelevant, so I'm gonna sustain the objection.
Do you know how much, if at all, older you are than Alexander Woodworth at the time of March 22nd, 2018?
Objection relevance.
Sustained.
You, in your training, you just had essentially the basic training to become a police officer, correct?
Correct.
You haven't had any specialized training, correct?
I guess that depends on how you define specialized training.
After you began working as an Eau Claire Police Department, have you had any special training?
Yes, beyond the scope of normal patrol, yes.
What was that training in?
Firearms, further instruction on DAT, defense and arrest tactics.
Okay. And DAT, defense and arrest tactics, that's use of force, correct?
Correct.
That's something that you're trained in as a law enforcement officer, correct?
Correct.
When it's permissible to use force, correct?
Correct.
When, what factors you should consider as a trained police officer in deciding when to escalate or to de-escalate,
Your
correct?
Honor, I'd like to approach on this.
All right. Council approach. Okay, objection overruled.
You have, you'd mentioned the word, the acronym DAT, is that right?
Correct.
And that was for Defense Arrest Tactics?
Correct.
And that, the policies from the Eau Claire Police Department are that they adopt the Department of Justice's DAT, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And as part of that DAT training, again, as a trained police officer, they give you extensive training about when you can use force, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And the factors that you can consider, correct?
That's correct.
In assessing what you see with your eyes, right?
Yes.
What prior knowledge you may have of the person based upon the situation that you're in.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I think we're going a little too far now.
Well, overruled. And again, Mr. Nelson, let's, we can just get to it. And
It's relevant, so I appreciate that. Some of the things that you need to assess are, again, what prior knowledge you may have of the person or the situation or the place or all of those matters, correct?
Correct.
In any of your other senses, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, probably not what you taste, but what you touch, right?
Correct.
Take all of those things into consideration, correct?
Yes.
And if you're assessing threats that are made to you, correct?
Myself or others.
Correct. And I imagine those are pretty stressful situations, right?
Yes.
Have you been in one of those, and I don't want to get into the detail, I'm just asking this question only. Have you been in one of those situations where you've needed to pull your firearm under the DAT policies?
Objection, relevance.
sustain.
Have you been in a stressful situation where you need to use some of your training like that?
Objection, relevance.
Again, I'm not going to get into it, I'm just laying the foundation to ask the next question.
Well, I'm going to sustain the objection. I think I'm giving you some latitude here, but I think you're going too far.
Those stressful situations ask for split-second decisions, is that right?
Objection, relevance.
I'm going to overrule that.
Sometimes, yes.
All right. So that's all I want to ask you about DAT. Firearms, DAT, any other specific training that you've had?
Are you talking before that time or after?
Between your start of your employment 5 years ago and March 23rd, 2018, those first 3.5 years of your career as a law enforcement officer with Eau Claire.
Yes, it's possible.
But nothing that comes to mind right now, correct?
I would have to review my training file. Nothing that comes to mind right now specifically, no.
And so you haven't had any specific training on how to deal with trauma victims, agreed?
I believe there is a portion in the police academy that I went through that talks about traumatic experiences.
But again, my question, in your training as an Eau Claire police officer in the 3.5 years, you've had no special training about trauma, agreed? That was before that, just general education. And my question to you is, in your employment as an Eau Claire police officer, in that 3.5 years leading up to March 23rd, 2018, you had no specific training regarding how to deal with victims of trauma, agreed?
It's hard for me to answer that question.
As you sit here today, you have no memory of any specific training, correct?
Unless you refer to training that would have been during my field training process, then yes, I would have had some training from a field training officer.
So, like in the field, whatever the other police officers tell you, correct?
What they tell me and what I experience.
Sure. But I want to ask you about actual specialized training where you go to a class, you meet with instructors, they tell you how to deal with that. Sounds like you have not had that training. You agree?
If it was before March 22nd of 2018, I do not believe I had any specific training where I went to a class.
Okay. Before you arrived at the hospital, you got some background about the case, is that right?
That's correct,
And
yes.
basically, you collected that from Dunn County Deputy Emmer Shields, is that right?
Yes,
You had learned that Ms. McCandless had met a male farmer at Mr. Sipple's house. Mr. Sipple, correct?
I believe that was his name. I can't remember
It was a man.
if I was told his name that day.
The farmer was a man, agreed?
Yes,
And that she met with a man named, from the State Patrol, Mr. Knutson, correct?
I don't know.
And a man named Emmer Shields, correct?
Yes,
And then a man named Matt Feeney from the Dunn County Sheriff's Department.
I don't know. The
A
only,
man
the only person-
named Greg Moan from the Dunn County Sheriff's Department.
I don't know.
2 men from the Menominee Fire Department and ambulance team.
Again, I don't know.
And then she was brought to the hospital to get care and treatment, is that right?
Yes,
And when she was at the hospital in the emergency room to get care and treatment, you came and spoke with her, correct?
yes,
And when you spoke with her, when she's in the middle of that care and treatment, that's the first time she's ever met you in her life, is that right?
that's correct, yes.
And one of the first, this whole interaction is recorded, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And so, have you had a chance to review the transcript of that recording that we provided to the prosecution team?
Yes, I have.
And in your review of that, I want to ask you as we go through this then, okay? And if you need to be refreshed, we can certainly refresh you, right? But according to the recording, essentially, your first words out of your mouth to her were, no. At what point did you and Alex part ways? Did you walk out of the vehicle or did he drive away? Did he get out of a car? Do you remember? Those are the first words that you said to this young lady who was in the hospital for care and treatment, correct?
Without looking at the transcript, I would say that's probably correct.
Sure. You, prior to your saying those words, you were there when Officer Reeves had asked her some questions, correct? Shields, I apologize, you're Officer Reeves, I got mixed up. I'll start over. Prior to that, you were in the room when Officer Shields had been asking her questions for about 30 to 60 seconds, is that right?
That's correct. I walked into the room after him. He had started asking her a few questions, and then I sat down next to her bedside and
Sure.
tried to assist.
And you were assisting law enforcement, right?
Yes.
You weren't there to assist the hospital.
No.
And when you sat down next to her, you didn't tell her your name.
I don't believe I did, no.
You didn't say hello.
No, I don't think so.
There was a young lady in the hospital for care and treatment, and you didn't ask, how are you?
I'm sorry, no, I don't think I did.
The first questions that you asked is essentially about the arm, correct?
I think I asked her about if she had driven her vehicle anywhere, if she could remember.
Okay. Actually, if I apologize, what you first asked, other than the question I said, is what happened to your knuckles? Is that right? And she said, I fell down. That was the beginning of your part of the conversation.
I think that was one of the first few questions that I asked, yes.
And then you asked, what had you been doing earlier in the day over at Alex's house? Is that right?
Something to that effect, yes.
And it's during that part of the interview in the beginning where she's crying as well, right?
Yes.
So when the state prosecution team was asking you questions about what happened, fair to say they didn't go in a chronological order about the order of the questions that you asked, did they?
No, not as the transcript shows that, no.
And as the transcript is, you've listened to the recording, right?
Yes,
And the recording accurately reflects what happened in that room, right?
yes.
So let me just back up so we can take this in chronological order, and I'll try to go through it quickly. But when you walked into the room, Mr. Shields' first question to her was, do you think that Alex is the one that cut you?
It's possible. I believe at that point he had extensive contacts with her. I wasn't sure if he was just starting from a point where he last left off. I was uncertain about where he exactly was at that point in his contact.
You understand my question is about the time when you and Mr. Shields walked into the room together to sit down and ask Ms. McCandless questions, right?
Yes,
So we understand that Mr. Shields may have done other things before, but I'm asking you questions about the time frame when you entered with Mr. Shields. Does that make sense?
yes, it does.
You two entered together, right?
Yes,
You were there when the first question that he asked to her in your presence was, do you think that Alex is the one that cut you, right?
yes,
And then Mr. Shields continues to ask her some questions about Alex and where he grabbed her and cut her, is that right?
yes,
And then he asked her where that was, and she says, no, it wasn't at his house. Is that right?
yes,
He asks, it wasn't at his house, question mark. She says, no, I don't know, it gets really dark and scary. It just hurts.
yes,
And then Mr. Shields asks her if she remembers any sounds or anything else to try to trigger her memory, is what he says, right?
yes,
And she doesn't respond, agreed?
I believe she just shook her head. I don't think she verbally responded.
And then Mr. Shields said, no, question mark, okay. To which Ms. McCandless responded, it's just dark. Is that right?
Yes,
While she's crying.
yes,
And then Mr. Shields asks her in particular about the knife, whether it was a razor or a folding knife, and Ms. McCandless describes a folding one that her dad always says to have in her car just in case someone hurts her, right?
yes,
And during that portion of her statements, she's again crying.
yes,
Mr. Shields asks if she was cut on the arm or on the leg as well, and she does not respond. Agreed?
yes,
Mr. Shields then asks, did he cut you down there? And there's no response, and Mr. Shields says, okay, what happened after he cut you?
yes,
And then Ms. McCandless says, it just got dark and scary, right?
yes,
And then I believe actually that's where you then step in and ask about, did you drive your vehicle anywhere?
yes,
And then it's after that where you said, at what point did you and Alex part ways? You ask him multiple questions. What time did you part ways? Did you walk out of the vehicle? Did he drive away? Did he get out? Do you remember? Right?
yes,
And she says, while crying, I don't remember, it hurts so much.
yes,
And then you begin asking her about her knuckles, where she tells you she fell down, which we went through before. Agreed?
yes,
And then you begin to go through the chronology of the day, where she talks about waking up and showering, being at her dad's house. Is that right?
that's correct.
And then she goes through the chronology that I believe you went through on direct about Racy's, Max, back to Racy's. Is that right?
Yes.
And then from there, it's on to Alex's to give him the heating pad and have contact with Alex. Is that right?
Yes.
And she tells you she had contact with Alex and his roommate, right?
Yes.
And she asked, what does Dave look like? And she says, I don't really know, he's just got tattoos, right?
Yes.
Asks if Dave stays there, and she says, yeah. Agreed?
Yes.
And then she again talks about being there, talking to Alex about John Hanson and Ezra McCandless's feelings about that, right?
Correct.
As well as her feelings about Alex, right?
Yes.
And then she tells you about Alex being upset, is that right?
Yes.
Angry.
Yes.
And then that Jason interrupted that, is that right?
Yes.
And then that eventually Jason leaves and Ezra and Alex leave in her car with her driving, right?
Yes.
And then you ask what happens from there, and she says, I just remember a frog, is that right?
Yes.
At that point, she told you several times, it's just dark and it's scary, correct?
That's correct.
She told you, I don't remember, correct?
Yes.
She told you, it hurts so much.
Yes.
She's crying,
Yes.
sobbing.
Yes.
At that point, did you ever reach out and physically or verbally to tell her, you don't have to talk about this right now? Did you ever tell her that?
I did not know.
Did you ever tell her, we want to make sure that you're safe and you're protected and we can come back and talk to you at another time?
Did not tell her that directly, no.
You just kept asking her questions.
Yes.
And that's when she talks to you again about playground, and you keep asking her follow-up questions about that. Is that right?
Yes.
And then at some point you say, did you just continue your conversation for where you left off at the house? And Ms. McCandless tells you, we were talking about my feelings and stuff.
Yes.
And then after she says, we were sitting there talking about the feelings, you turn and say, you guys are sitting there talking at the park. At what point did he cut your arm? You went back to the arm. Is that right?
Yes.
And she didn't respond to that, did she? There was no verbal response on the recording. Agreed?
Agreed, yes.
And you followed up with that. You don't remember what point. You asked that question, and again, she did not verbally respond. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And then you asked, what was he saying? And she said, I don't know.
That's correct.
Again, you didn't pause to let her know that she could have some time to gather her thoughts.
No.
Do you at that point know if she'd received any care at the hospital?
I don't know.
If she'd received any treatment at all at the hospital?
I did not know. No.
If she'd had any ability to have contact with her mother
I don't know.
or her family
I don't know.
or anybody that she knows and loves?
I don't know. No.
You just kept asking her questions.
Yes.
And at some point she told you, he just kept on saying I was a boy. That's what she told you, right?
Yes.
And then you ask why, and she says, because when me and Alex used to be involved, he used to call me a little boy. She told you that, right?
Yes.
And that's when you asked, why does he call you that? And she didn't respond.
That's correct.
You asked, does he treat you poorly when you guys are together? And she told you, sometimes.
Yes.
You asked if he threatens or calls her other names, and again, she didn't respond. At least not verbally, correct?
That's correct.
Because the next words out of your mouth were, he does. That's what you say, correct?
That's correct.
And you say that because while she didn't give you a verbal response, she gave you a non-verbal response indicating, yes, sometimes he threatens me.
That's correct.
So she wasn't perhaps able to talk about it, but she was able to communicate to you what had happened in the past.
Yes.
You said, what other things does he say? You asked her that, correct?
Yes.
And it's unclear from the recording because she's crying, but at some point you hear her say, when I don't want to do stuff.
Yes.
And you ask, what kind of stuff are you talking about? And again, Ms. McCandless doesn't give you a verbal response at that point, correct?
I believe her response was, it's sensitive, or something along those lines.
Okay? And whether that was physical or emotional, you didn't know.
No.
It could have been both.
Yes.
And then you follow up by saying, are you talking about like sexual things? And then you said, you asked that question, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And then you must not have got a response because the next thing you say is, okay.
Yes.
Did she again communicate to you non-verbally with a nod of her head in agreement that it was about sexual things?
I believe she did, yes.
And then she actually was able to speak. And what she told you with her words that she was able to say to you was, he makes me lay down and do stuff.
I believe that's what she said, yes.
And again, you asked, does he like physically grab you, make you lay down and do things? And again, there's no audible response from the woman in the hospital bed sitting next to you, right?
Yes.
But your next words were, he does. Okay? Those are the next words that you said to him, her. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And the reason that you said those words is because she, once again, while she wasn't able to speak, she was able to communicate with you non-verbally in agreement to your question, does he physically grab you and make you lay down and do stuff?
Yes.
And then you asked, did he do that today? Correct?
Yes, I did.
And she says, I don't remember much. It was just dark and it was scary. Is that right?
Yes.
And then you again go back and ask her, was it at the house or were we at the park? And she says, I don't know.
Yes.
She's crying.
Yes.
Fair to say, if we listen to the recording, you'd hear her sobbing.
You could hear her cry, yes.
Cry loudly. Correct?
I don't know that I would say it was loudly, but she was crying.
Okay. And again, at that point, after she says, I don't know, when she's crying, and she's told you that it's dark and scary, do you tell her, you know, we can come back at another time?
At that point, no.
Did you tell her, look, I want to make sure that you get the care and the treatment that you need, and we'll come back and talk to you a different time?
At that point, no.
You just kept asking her questions, right?
Yes.
And it's at that point where she says to you repeatedly, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm going to object, Your Honor. It's in response to a question, and I...
Again, that's not a legal objection. I'm asking the witness a question. He gets to
And
choose
he's asking a
whether-
question
You
that's...
can't have more than one person talking at a time, so.
The transcript is, I'm asking him a question. Is there a legal objection to the question?
The question is misleading.
That's not a.
Well, I don't have a transcript, so I have no idea. But go ahead, I'm just going to overrule. Go ahead and ask your question, then you can handle that.
Let's just make clear, all right?
Redirect.
Again, I'd go on chronologically through the reporting pretty accurately, right?
Yes.
And this is after the point where she had just described to you it was dark and scary, then you asked her about whether it was back at the house or the park, and she says, I don't know. We're just putting you into context. Are you there?
Yes.
And then you ask, do you know where Alex is now? You asked her that, right?
Yes.
And that's when it's obvious that she's crying.
Yes, it is.
Her response is, no, I don't know, don't know, I don't know, I don't know.
Yes.
And then you keep asking her questions. And you ask, did he mention to you what he was going to do or where he was going to go the rest of the day? You asked that. Is that right?
That's correct.
And she says again, no, no, I don't know, I don't know. Is that right?
Yes.
And you keep asking her questions and you say, did you drop him back off at home? And she doesn't respond. Agreed?
Agreed.
She's crying.
Yes.
In fact, at some point, she grabs the blanket and pulls it up over her head, does she not? Or at least up over her face?
She had the blanket up to her face during the entire contact.
Fair to say she didn't look comfortable at all.
No.
You agree with me? You agree she did not look comfortable? She was crying, she had a blanket up against her face.
I would agree she didn't look like she was comfortable, no.
But you kept asking questions.
Yes, I did.
You were trying to get information, right?
Yes.
But you didn't necessarily tell her that, other than you just kept asking her questions, right?
That's correct, yes.
You didn't tell her that she could decline to answer.
No.
You didn't read her rights.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Sustained.
You gave her no information or knowledge about what options a 20-year-old woman in the hospital seeking care and treatment could do other than to sit there and answer your questions, right?
That's accurate, yes.
Then at some point, she grabbed a vomit bag, is that right?
Yes.
And began dry heaving into that bag.
Yes.
And it's at that point that you left.
I believe a nurse had stepped in. I believe it was the same nurse was preparing to start her examination.
A female walked in, is that right?
Yes.
A woman.
Yes.
And she came by Ezra's side.
She went to the monitor that was next to her bed, yes.
And she was there to provide care to Miss McCandless, is that right?
I believe she was there to conduct a SANE exam.
Sure. You weren't there for that same exam, were you?
I was outside of the hospital.
This was a trained nurse who did that, right?
Yes.
And that nurse then, you don't know if she did or didn't give her care, do you?
I don't know.
You don't know if she did or didn't give her treatment.
I don't know.
But when that nurse walked in, you then left.
Yes.
And at that point, Ms. McCandless hadn't showered, correct?
Objection calls for speculation.
Do you know did she appear as if she had showered? I'll withdraw the question and start over.
Okay.
Sorry,
Thank you. I'd appreciate if you'd stop and there's an objection instead of just plowing on.
I
So,
understand.
go ahead.
It did not appear as if she had showered. Agreed?
Agreed.
And she hadn't yet received any treatment as far as you know, right?
As far as I know, no.
And then the nurse walked in, right?
That's correct, yes.
And then you left.
Objection asked and answered at least three.
Sustained, asked and answered, I heard at least 3 times.
That's fine. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, redirect.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. I want to start out, Officer Reeves, can you tell the jury, how you were asking questions? I mean, what kind of demeanor you were having as you were asking her questions?
Not unsimilar to how I'm sitting now. I was sitting on a bench next to her bedside, talking in the same tone of voice that I'm using now.
Right. Ever raise your voice, ever act like you were upset or perturbed with her answers?
No.
What was the reason why you were interviewing her at that time?
At that time, based on the information that I had, I believe that I was interviewing a victim.
And are you trying to get information so you can work on a case to help her?
Yes, seeing as the first part of it was to try and locate the male subject that was allegedly involved.
All right. And at that point in time, did you believe the male subject to be a victim or potentially a perpetrator?
Potentially a perpetrator.
And so your purpose in talking to her was what?
I was trying to gather information potentially about his whereabouts to try and prevent him from having any further contact with her, so that law enforcement could interview him, so that we could prevent him from having any further contact with her.
All right. Since we've heard a lot about this, I'm going to have this marked as an exhibit.
Objection, can we approach?
Officer Reeves, you had a chance, I think you said on cross-examination, to read over a rough transcript of the your interview with the defendant, correct?
Correct.
Right. Did you also have a chance yesterday to listen to the actual recording of it as well?
I did, yes.
All right. And so I'm going to ask you some questions about what you recall from your reading it and from reviewing the transcript. You were asked about a question about if there was something that could trigger her memory or where she was at when this took place. And you were asked if she had an audible response, and she didn't, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did she have a nonverbal response to that?
I believe she did, yes.
And what was that nonverbal response?
I believe it was a nod.
A yes or a no gesture?
I believe it was a yes.
If the next line, or if the next statement, do you recall if the next statement was something like no, okay? What would that refresh your memory as to whether it would have been a yes or a no?
Objection, didn't say his memory needed to be refreshed. He answered the question, yes.
All right, never mind. That's fine. We'll leave it at that. You asked, the question was asked before about whether or not, and it was asked by Deputy Shields whether or not the defendant, or whether or not Alex cut her on her arm or on her leg as well. And again, you were asked if there was an audible response. There wasn't one. Do you recall if she gave a nonverbal response to that one?
I believe her nonverbal response was also a nod. Yes.
A nod, yes. Okay. Now, when you were asking questions about what she did earlier in the day, that is, before she met or before she left from from Alex's residence after the police had come, did she have any problems remembering what those events were?
You're referring to the events before she left her father's residence?
No, after she left her father's residence and until she until she left Alex's residence after law enforcement, the Eau Claire police had been there.
She seemed to be able to remember those things fine.
So she was able to describe all those events to you with no problems.
Yes.
And during the course of those events, did she ever tell you that while she was at Alex's residence, that they discussed the relationship that they had had?
I don't believe she did, no.
Now, were you aware or did you understand that there was, or that Deputy Shields had previously talked to the defendant about the events of March 22nd?
Yes, I was aware that he had talked to her prior to my arrival.
All right. And while you were talking to the defendant, along with Deputy Shields, did the defendant ever say anything like, hey, I really can't talk to you now, or I don't feel comfortable talking to you?
I don't believe she did, no.
Did she ever do anything non-verbally to indicate that she did not want to talk to you anymore?
Not to my memory, no.
There had been some questions about having this blanket up by her face. Did she ever put it over her face in an attempt to, to hide from you or do something like that?
No.
Did she move the blanket from where it was during the course of the interview, or did it pretty much stay in the same location the whole time?
It stayed in the same location the whole time.
Right. Prior to or during the course of your interview with the defendant, did anyone from the hospital indicate that there was an issue with you being able to talk to her?
No.
They ever tell you, no, don't talk to the defendant, she's not in any shape to do that?
No.
There were some questions about, actually, right at the start of the interview, did Deputy Shields say something to the effect or something similar to, I'm going to ask you some questions, is that okay?
Yes, he did.
And what was the defendant's response to that?
I believe it was another nonverbal nod, yes.
And at any point in time during the questioning, did she change that and say, no, I don't want to answer any more questions?
No, I don't believe so.
And there were some questions about, that were asked about, whether Alex was upset when, or angry when the subject of the John Hanson matter came up. Did she say anything specific about what Alex said in response to her bringing up the John Hanson matter?
She said that his response was he was concerned that he might try to hurt somebody else.
I'm sorry?
He was concerned that John might try to hurt somebody else, or who will he hurt next? Something
Alex
like
was concerned about that?
that. Yes.
All right. Did she tell you what John Hanson did to her that was the subject of that investigation?
She did not tell me specifically what he did, no.
when you asked about the investigation that it was, and she told you that it was something about John, did you ask her?
Objection leading. He answered, she did not tell me specifically, no, he's not leading it.
I'm going to ask if I can finish my question, Your
Yeah,
Honor.
why don't you finish the question?
Yes. Did you ask her who's John?
I'm sorry, I can't remember.
All right, would reviewing this transcript refresh your memory as to that?
Is it transcript of my contact with her?
Yes.
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Page 18, counsel.
Okay.
Does that refresh your memory, Officer Reeves?
Yes, it does.
Did you ask her who's John?
Yes.
And what was her response?
She said John was the one who raped me.
While you were in the room, actually, by the way, when you first entered the defendant's room, was there anybody else in the room when you got in there besides the defendant?
Before I entered, I know Deputy Shields walked in before I did. I know that she was seen very briefly by the same nurse. She made a comment to me. But otherwise, I don't believe there was anyone else in the room with.
What? Okay, so Deputy Shields went in first.
Yes.
Okay. Did anybody leave the room before you entered the room after Deputy Shields entered?
No, I don't believe so.
And when you went in there, who was in the room?
Ezra, Deputy Shields, and myself.
Okay. At the conclusion of the interview, do you recall what you said to the defendant?
Very last thing I said, I do not remember.
All right. Do you recall if it could have been something similar to, or can you tell me whether or not it was something similar to, I'll let you take care of your business now?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross, Mr. Nelson?
Briefly, there's an audio recording of this, correct?
Correct.
It's not there's a squad cam, correct?
Correct.
So there's a video and an audio portion of the recording, correct?
Correct.
But the video portion is just your car parked in the parking lot outside of the hospital, right?
Correct.
Ezra's not recorded on the video, agreed?
Agreed.
And you're not recorded on the video portion, agreed?
Agreed.
So the interaction that we've just been talking about, there's no visual way to go back and look at it, right?
That's correct.
But we can listen to it, right?
Yes.
The audio was captured, correct?
Yes.
And that's on a recording.
Yes.
To hear all of this stuff that we've just been talking about in court, right?
Yes.
And you had the opportunity to listen to that, to hear her, how exactly she sounded and how exactly you sounded. All of those sounds are on a recording that you got to hear yesterday.
Yes.
And the beginning of this interaction with Ms. McCandless on that night, the first words out of Deputy Shields' words are, "I heard you talking to the nurse." Right?
Yes.
So while the questions that were asked of you by Mr. Dufour were whether anybody left when Mr. Shields walked in, what he did ask you is, did anybody leave just before Mr. Shields walked in? The nurse left just before Mr. Shields walked in, right?
I believe so, yes.
The nurse was there to provide care, correct?
I would assume yes.
And the door was open and you guys could hear what was going on and being interacted about.
No, the door was closed.
So you could hear what was going on, whether the door was open or closed, right?
In the room while she was there with the nurse?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Shields says, "I heard you talking to the nurse." He was truthful when he told her that, right?
I think he was more, I heard you were talking to the nurse, not I heard you talking to the nurse. I guess I can't say what he said, I suppose.
You may not have been able to hear the actual words, but you could tell that there was a conversation in there between the two people that were in there, right?
Yes, I was talking to Deputy Shields outside of the room, so I wasn't paying as much attention to exactly what was going on inside that room.
You were waiting for the nurse to finish up.
Yes,
And as soon as the nurse finished up and walked out, you or Deputy Shields and then you followed, walked in. Is that right?
yes.
So she wasn't alone at all, was she?
No,
And then after he says, "I heard you talking about the nurse," he asks about the cut. Do you think that Alex is the one that cut you? Is that right?
yes.
And then there's no response, and then Mr. Shields says this series of questions. "Okay, I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions, okay? So just so you know, do you know, was it in your vehicle? Is that where this happened?" Those are the words that Mr. Shields said to her. Is that right?
That's correct.
Whether there was any pause in his statement telling her that he was going to ask her any questions, you don't have a memory of right now, correct?
It was a very brief pause.
Of a police officer making a statement to her about he's going to ask her some questions, right?
Yes,
And when you walked in, you'd seen her curled up on the bed, is that right?
Objection beyond the scope of my redirect.
Sustained, and I heard you asking about this already several times.
At some point, she's sitting up, rocking back and forth, is that right?
Objection beyond the scope of my redirect.
Sustained.
You'd were asked about your purpose in being there to talk to her. Do you remember that? One of the questions that the state asked you is your purpose was to go there to help her to get information to protect her from Alex or to see what Alex was doing, or is that right?
that's correct, yes.
And that was your purpose, right?
To gather information, yes.
And that's the purpose that you had in your head, correct?
Yes,
But you never communicated that to Ms. McCandless, did you?
I did not know.
So you had no way of knowing whether she knew that was your purpose or why you were there or why you were asking questions, right?
I had no way of knowing, no.
Most of the time when you want somebody to know what your purpose is, you tell them, right?
That's correct, yes.
And so while you may have had a purpose and may have been well-intentioned, you didn't communicate that to Ms. McCandless, did you?
I guess I didn't say it specifically to her, no.
And at the end, you finished up by saying, "I'll let you take care of your business." Is that right?
Yes, I
Because
was,
you knew there was business that this young lady needed to take care of in the hospital, right?
At that point, I was referring to both her and the nurse. I can't remember exactly if I was saying, I'll let you take care of your business to Ezra, or if it was to the nurse that was now standing next to her
If it was
doing her thing.
to the nurse standing there, it was for the nurse to take care of her business, to provide Ms. McCandless the care and treatment that she was in the hospital to receive.
Yes.
That's all.